I was born in Portchester, New York, but only in the hospital. So my mother used to tell me I was. And the reason was because there were no doctors there in the Greenwich. See, I'm from Greenwich, Connecticut, which is Greenwich is very close to Portchester. Here's the end of Connecticut. Here's the beginning of New York, and this is where my family lived, right on the cusp, kind of. But there was no doctor around to deliver me, so that was the reason I was born in Portchester. I was like, they chauffeured my mother to the Portchester hospital, and that's where I was delivered. And then she brought me home, and so she says, put me under the Christmas tree, because I was born on December 16th, so it was right around Christmas time. So I was always very attracted to the sound of the electric guitar. I didn't know the difference between an electric or acoustic guitar. I didn't even know what electricity was, But I know that there was something about the electric guitar, or that sound that I was hearing on records that drew me in. And then I remember one experience when I was about that age, is being outside on my front porch and hearing this sound kind of was coming across the airwaves, in the live. I said, well, what is that? So I kind of traced down the sound, and I walked, and it was in a neighbor's yard, sitting up on a porch was this guy with his feet up on the railing with an electric guitar plugged into an amp, and I just was like, what is that, Because already I had a little acoustic guitar that my parents had bought me. It was made by the Harmony Company, and it cost $49, and it really hurt your fingers to play it. It was a steel string guitar. It was really an awful thing. I actually used it to play baseball a couple of times. I didn't have a bat. Well, use my guitar. This is fine. But when I heard this sound, I realized that just drew me in like a magnet. And so I asked him what it was, this guy, and he said, this is an electric guitar, and this is what they call an amplifier. So that was, at that point, I knew I wanted that. Also, at that same time, I had two friends who were in school with me. One played saxophone and one played trombone. They're brothers. And they were into jazz, heavy. And they had a little room in their house upstairs, with a hi-fi player and stacks of vinyl. And they would take me up there and they'd say, listen to this. And they played Barney Kessel, playing some bebop guitar. And that was the first jazz I ever heard, was Barney Kessel on any instrument, And I was already a big fan of Chuck Berry, but when you start comparing the difference between the music, it was definitely a difference, but it wasn't a leap into outer space. Because Chuck Berry was a very bluesy player, but so was Barney Kessel. It was just more sophisticated. He played more notes. And I just knew something was different about it, but I could relate to it. In other words, it didn't sound foreign to me. And I immediately liked that. And then I remember playing me Dave Brubeck, and I just fell in love with the smoothness of the whole thing. How smooth, that Paul Desmond sounded, and everything was just like so smooth. So I was getting more and more into it. And then one day they played me Miles with, there was a record that was out years ago. I'm sure it was reissued, but it was the one with Stella by Starlight and Green Dolphin Street on one. And on one side was standards, and if you turned the record over, it was the soundtrack to something called The Elevator to the Scaffold. Remember this? Which was an old French movie, which Miles had done the soundtrack for, which is basically, I think, him playing with a French rhythm section, just playing fast kind of bebop trumpet with brushes, and very cool. But I love the side with the songs on it, because that was the famous group with Coltrane and Cannonball Adderley, of course, and Bill Evans. And when he played me that, then I was over the top. And one night I went down and I heard John Coltrane Quartet, Bill Evans Trio, or John Coltrane Quintet with Eric Dolphy. And I always remember the night I was there, Elvin Jones was late, and Paul Motian had to play drums the first set with Coltrane. And I remember this, and I didn't meet Paul Motian until obviously many, many years later. And as soon as I got to know him just a little bit, I said, I told him this story. I said, when I was a kid, I was in Birdland and you played. He said, you were there? That was one set. I said, it stuck in my mind, and I don't know why, because I didn't know who Paul Motian was or Elvin Jones was, and barely had heard of John Coltrane. So, but I remembered the announcement. Mr. Elvin Jones will be detained, and Mr. Paul Motian will now play with the group.
Wow.
So yes, McCoy I knew, and still know, but. And I asked him one time, I tried to ask him, what were you guys doing, Oh man, no, it's not really, no. He fluffed it off, he kind of pushed it aside. He obviously didn't want to talk about it. And I often wonder, was it all just completely spontaneous and organic, how they, because Coltrane, it sounded like he really worked on things, how to play certain things. And I often wondered, how did McCoy figure out how to accompany him? Because it was always like the perfect compliment, but he wouldn't talk to me about it. So I began to get catalogs from different schools and realized there was only one place I could go. I didn't have a choice. It was Berklee School of Music in those days, because all the other schools either didn't accept guitar as a major instrument, even classical guitar. They wouldn't even accept, some of them, guitar was not even listed as a viable instrument, And then I got the catalog from Berklee, and there was a picture of this school on Newbury Street in Boston's Back Bay, and a bunch of musicians standing in front of the school, like people that were going there. And one of them was the Hungarian guitarist, Gabor Szabo. And I saw this, I said, that's a guitar, maybe I can go there. And then I read the requirements, which were ridiculous. I mean, it was just like 2 years of professional musical experience. Of course, everybody lied about that, because I played in a couple of local record hops and played with rock and roll bands. Yeah, I got some experience. Yeah, I know what I'm doing. So of course I was accepted. If you could pay the tuition, you were accepted. That's basically what it amounted to. And I went up there and realized that I really didn't know anything, and that there were some people there who did know quite a bit. So I realized that this music was a lot harder than I had ever imagined. It was no longer, now if I wanted to do it and make it a reality, it was going to be hard to really do this. I'm not just going to wake up and be able to figure this out, I used to come home in the summers and get a job in the local supermarket, stocking shelves or whatever I was doing, and one year I worked for a veterinary office, things like that. And I think by my end of my second year in Berklee, I just remember calling my family and saying, I'm not coming home. And they said, well, why not? I said, I got a gig, I can make some money. I can play out in Cape Cod, or I can go here, and I've got these offers. And then I started to make money and wound up putting myself through the rest of my own schooling, basically, because I could make enough to pay my tuition, or my room and board for sure,
Now, was your approach to music shaped by ECM?
Yes, as a matter of fact, I remember listening to a recording of Hindemith one time with Manfred. Manfred said, I want to play you something, and he put this record on, and it was Isaac Stern playing a Hindemith concerto, I guess. That's all I can remember. I think it was Hindemith, but it was the Adagio movement, because Manfred says, I only listen to Adagios. I said, wow, what a cool thing to say. I only listen to Adagios. So I wrote that down, it's like, no, man, I only listen to Adagios. Don't play me that fat stuff, man. But he played me this movement, and it was so beautiful, and then when we got in the studio to record, like maybe a year later or 6 months later, I had this habit of, which I got from studio guitar players, of using a volume pedal to control the dynamics of the guitars, and you get this sort of this kind of violin type approach. So we're in the studio one day recording, and I'm hearing Manfred. Manfred comes on the talkback microphone and goes, John, more Isaac, more Isaac. Jawohl. But he was inspiring me to play a certain way. I mean, he wasn't ordering me to, but he was just getting inspired by a certain thing I did, and he trying to take it to another place, I guess. Yeah. And so I was very influenced by not only him, but also by a lot of the European music I was hearing. A lot of the European players, from Jan Garbarek to Enrico Rava, and all these great musicians from all around the world, and realized that they had a different way to play. I always go back to my first guitar teacher, who came to the house one day, and he had his guitar, and also with him he had a separate little box. I said, what's in the box, man? What's going on? He said, it's called a reverb unit. And Fender used to make them. It was a little standalone box, probably about that long or maybe that high. I said, what do you do with it? What does it do? He said, well, you plug your guitar in here, and then you come out of this thing called an output, and you plug that back into your amplifier, and it's going to give you what they call reverb. And I really didn't know what reverb was at the time, because, and the first time I heard it, things started to explode and go off, and wow, because it made the sound more, it made this ambience around the sound, this space that I really liked, even as a kid. So maybe I was originally just an ECMer at heart, born with a reverb tube in his mouth, or something,